The world crisis of 2007-2008 exploded into a public debt crisis in the EU South in 2010. Caught between unbending Eurozone monetary rules and inability to roll over its public debt, the Greek government agreed to a Memorandum of Understanding with the IMF, the ECB and the European Commission, the dreaded Troika. It thus agreed to one of the harshest austerity regimes ever to be imposed on a developed country. In total, from March 2010 to May 2017, Greeks would suffer through 14 installments of austerity measures. Greece lost approximately a quarter of its GDP over the next 4 years, a collapse unprecedented in its depth and duration in the developed world in peacetime. The memoranda were imposed according to the official narrative to reduce Greece's public debt, which was considered not viable. In 2010, after nearly 2 years of crisis, it had risen to over 140% of GDP, after fluctuating around 100% for 15 years. In the first memorandum of 2010, a series of structural measures aiming to achieve finance consolidation and to enhance the competitiveness of the Greek economy were put in place as a condition for borrowing, supposedly to help service the country's debt and eschew bankruptcy. One principal aim was to gain flexibility in the labor market. It led to facilitating layoffs, reducing worker rights, reconfiguring working time and lowering salaries and wages. This severely limited the scope of free collective bargaining between employers and unions in order to reach national or sectorial agreements. In the second memorandum of 2012, further reforms in the labor market were made a condition for the reduction of government debt through a private sector haircut and the conclusion of a new 130 billion euros loan agreement. The most important of these interventions were the drastic horizontal reduction of the minimum wage by government decree, the gradual but rapid reduction by legislative measures of labor costs in the private sector, and the further erosion of labor rights, including the severe limitation of the union's recourse to arbitration. As was foreseen, wages in both the public and the private sector collapsed. Working conditions deteriorated. Unemployment peaked at over 27%. In the public sector, between 2009 and 2013, public expenditure was reduced by 29.7% and employment in general government declined by 34%. Between 2009 and 2017, salaries in the public sector decreased up to 55% and working hours increased from 37.5 to 40 weekly. This resulted in a deterioration of public services that compound the decline of living standards for the majority of the Greek population. This decline was nowhere more pronounced and deadly than in the public health sector. This included a reduction in medical personnel salaries, but also a decline in infrastructure expenditure, in public hospital funding, in available beds, in emergency service facilities. The collapse also resulted in a massive flight of doctors to other countries. All this had an effect on the key health indices, including overall mortality, a rate of increase not seen since the early 1960s in the country. So the decline of the Greek public health system is intimately tied to the general economic decline, and, as most things during the crisis, it affected the poor much more harshly. But after all the pain, the misery, the decline of health services in Greece, did the austerity measures achieve their stated goal? Has Greek government debt declined? The answer is no. On the contrary, despite private sector debt haircuts and public misery, The debt now hovers around and above 170%. If the aim of the austerity measures was to fix the debt crisis, it failed. Greece was drawn into a socio-economic crisis, exacerbated by the austerity measures on false pretenses.